Today, our segment, we're going to be talking about opioid overdose. Kelly, what would you say puts somebody at increased risk for overdose, or how would somebody overdose?
Okay. One of the elements definitely would be a combination of one or more depressors. So an opioid is considered a depressor of the central nervous system. Basically, it means that it slows down the system. So other substances that are also depressors are alcohol, benzodiazepines, so like any kind of Xanax, any kind of benzo, and GHB, for example. Those are all different forms of depressors, as well as other opioids, obviously. So if somebody were to take one or more of the substances, it is putting them more at risk for an overdose, that the breathing and the heart rate slows down until it actually stops. There's also using, if somebody's prescribed a medication, using higher than the prescribed amount, higher than the dose, using in a different way. If somebody initially took by orally and ended up sniffing or injecting or any other way of using, it's higher risk. If it's an illicit substance, or if it's bought on black market, if they change dealers or a different batch, it can be contaminated. It could be having different kinds of elements that could be, not elements, but substances that could add to. What else could lead to? It could be using by themselves. Somebody who has used on their own and is isolated, they're higher risk, as well as ironic as it sounds, but people using together. Because of the fact that if everybody's using at the same time, nobody can actually intervene, right? If there's something that happens, it's a bad batch, for example, then that would be that. There's also the possibility, if we're talking about prescription medications, that there's one or more opioid, like if somebody has had a prescription and it overlaps with another prescription, that period of time is dangerous. And somebody who's starting starting an opiate replacement program, the first 3 days normally are a very dangerous period of time because it hasn't had its full effect. So the person will be using to make up for it, but it puts them at higher risk.
I have a question about fentanyl.
Yes.
So we hear a lot about fentanyl and carfentanil being mixed into the street drugs these days. I know there's been a lot of cases in Quebec recently, and more recently in the Montérégie. Is that something that you can talk about?
Sure. Fentanyl it's actually a prescription medication that has been used for years. Most of the time it comes as a patch. It's for chronic pain, right? But the fentanyl that we're hearing more about right now is a lot of the time artisanal. At the same time, like there is a legal medical fentanyl, but the ones that we're hearing more about right now are more pill form. So it is, the baseline that we use when we're talking about opioids is morphine, right? Which is, right, we consider it the baseline. Fentanyl is 100 times more powerful than morphine. So it's 40 times more powerful than heroin, just to give an idea. And so what happens is there has been contaminations, right? Whether it is on purpose or not, it can be used to make the substance stronger. It could also be just cross-contamination from table, this or that, right? And it doesn't take a lot of fentanyl to be more, the equivalent of a couple of grains of salt are enough for it to be fatal. And carfentanil is 100 times stronger than fentanyl. So fentanyl we have found in Montérégie area in different substances. Last week or 2 weeks ago, it was actually found in Montreal in crack as well. And carfentanil, as of this week, we found in substances in a fatal overdose as well, unfortunately. So it is something that is in the area.
Okay.
And to be careful for.
Wow. So how would you recognize an overdose?
The person, if somebody is using an opioid, already their eyes could be, the pupils of their eyes could be at pinpoints. So meaning that it's a very small pupil. The person, when they're overdosing, could have more difficulties breathing. There could be a sound like like they're snoring, but it's more hoarse. of a sound, the person may change colors. Their lips could be blue, their fingernails could be blue. Those would be all physical signs right off the bat. So ideally, it's like going up to them, trying to get attention, trying to wake them up, right? Because there's a thin line between sometimes what's looked for as an extreme dose and a fatal overdose, right? So, right, those would be...
So it's really looking out, making sure they're breathing, making sure that they still have a pulse, making sure that they're awake, like you said, trying to wake them up, you know,
right,
like
right.
just to make sure that they're still with us.
Right. Lips and fingernails are huge, like one of the first visible signs of the fact that the oxygen isn't going through.
Okay. So if you do recognize an overdose, what is the first thing a person should do?
Well, that's it. It is to see, first of all, if you see that somebody is having difficulties, first of all, it's to secure the environment, right? Because depending on where you are, the environment could be different. If you're at a party, there's people, animals, whatever, depending on the method of use, how the person had used, there could be, you know, syringes, there could be anything around, right? So it's to make sure that you're safe first to be able to intervene, then to go to recognize that that's exactly what's happening, the signs and symptoms of the overdose, to try to wake the person up, to clap, to possibly physically to rub your knuckles along the sternum usually is a good way to wake somebody up. And if they haven't responded to that, would be to call, if in the community, would be peacekeepers.
Yeah.
And off the community, out of the community would be 911, right off the bat. Then it would be to administer naloxone. The fact that naloxone takes 3 to 5 minutes, depending on which form of naloxone.
Sorry, can we just take a minute to explain what naloxone is? What is Narcan?
Yep.
And where can somebody possibly get it? Who should get it as well?
Yep. Well, anybody who has prescription opioids having naloxone. Narcan is just a different name for naloxone. It's the same substance, same molecule. It's a kind of an antidote. So anybody who has a prescription opioid, well, a prescription for opioids, having that, terrific. Anybody who's taking any kind of substances, at this point, I'd say anybody who's taking any substances to have it, it does no harm.
Okay.
It's the
so for anybody who's overdosing, it would be a good idea to administer Narcan or Naloxone.
Exactly.
Because of the risk of having fentanyl laced in these drugs. Exactly.
Or anything else, right? It could be cross-contamination. It could be, exactly. So no matter what the person has taken, it could be the first, the first
step
exactly.
in recovering.
Exactly. And if it's an opioid, the person will possibly recover, but because fentanyl and carfentanil are so strong, it may take more than one dose. So there are steps, which we'll address in a minute, but naloxone, that's it, is the antidote. So it is something that opioids, they go onto the receptors in the brain, and what happens is fentanyl comes in, naloxone comes in and takes it out of the receptor temporarily. So if there is fentanyl, and if the person does come back to, it could be between 20 and 90 minutes. So it's really, really important that the person gets emergency help, first of all. Also, anybody, it's not dangerous. It's not like, it gives no buzz. It doesn't do any harm in any way. The worst case scenario, it'll be ineffective. That's it. There's no after effects, there's no side effects, there's no difficulties that can come from naloxone. So it's always a good idea to administer it if you can.
Okay, so I know our local pharmacies carry naloxone. It's free of charge for any community members that would like it. You just go in, you request it. You would have to give your Medicare card or your band card, just so they have it on file that they've given it to you, and they will give you a little lesson on how to use it, making sure that you are calling the police and the ambulance service so that the person can get checked up on, because as she said, the naloxone is only effective for 20 to 90 minutes, so there's still risk of overdose even if you give the naloxone and the person comes to. Mm-hmm. So just to let you know that, go to our local pharmacy and they carry naloxone. It's a good idea to have.
And you're allowed to have up to 8 doses a day given. So if you use it one day and you've used, say, four doses on somebody, you're allowed to go back and get more, right?
Yeah.
The idea is for as many people as possible to have access to it and have it on hand. Because unfortunately, an overdose a lot of the time is fatal.
Yeah, so for people using street drugs recreationally, or for people who are using prescription medication, it's available to anybody. So it's super good information to know. And
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So did you want to readdress the steps when there's a?
Yeah. So do you? Okay.
Well, that's it. The first one is obviously secure the environment, to make sure if somebody is overdosing, to make sure that you, as the person intervening, are not at risk for anything, animals, stuff like that, because unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, it has happened quite often that there's an animal they're going to try to protect, right? So to have somebody take the animal away, so it's secure the environment, not making sure, but recognizing that that's what it is. So the physiological symptoms, the blue lips, the blue fingernails, I mean, obviously not going to check the eyes, but the pinpointed eyes, the compressed breathing or not breathing, the sound that is like snoring, but it's deeper. Then calling either peacekeepers or 911, depending on where you're at, and administering the naloxone. It takes 3 to 5 minutes to take effect, so doing CPR will always help. If you know how to do it, at the same time, it's helping circulate the naloxone in the system. And because it takes 3 to 5 minutes, it has to have that circulation, right? So giving CPR and then a second dose of naloxone, CPR, a second dose of naloxone, until either peacekeepers or emergency services show up. To keep giving naloxone each time, because of the fact, like as I said, fentanyl and carfentanil they adhere very strongly to the receptors, so it's hard to get it out.
Okay. Something we didn't discuss that I think is very important to users might be the Good Samaritan law, because not everybody will feel comfortable to call the peacekeepers or to call 911 if they're using drugs.
Right.
So do you just want to explain that?
Definitely. The Good Samaritan law is extremely important, actually. It's something that everybody should know about. It entails that if you are using, if you are there, if you have a quantity of drugs on you, you cannot be arrested or intercepted for it. It protects you. If you're going in with good intentions, actually there's 2 parts of the law. If you go in with good intentions and you're intervening on the person, and you end up doing harm, but your intentions are good, you're protected by it, right? You have the responsibility of intervening. The second one is you're protected by it. But it also protects if you're using, if you have drugs on you, if they're there, I mean, unless it's like a kilo sitting on the table, which obviously isn't quite the same thing, but for personal use, the police will not stop.
Okay, so a user is not going to get in trouble for using. The primary goal is to make sure that the person that's there, that's in trouble, is being helped, that their life isn't lost to overdose.
Exactly. And I mean, even somebody who's under warrant for arrest or everything else, they do have the right to not respond, because in the sense of asking for their information and everything else, the police do have files to write, but there's no reason to be intercepted, so they don't necessarily have to respond. If there's a huge fear, obviously writing a note or whatever and saying what the person used, but ideally it's to stay with the person, it's to be there, to be able to give the information, because unfortunately there have been way too many overdoses because of fear, and the law is there to protect the person who has overdosed and the people that are accompanying them.
Okay, so I think we shared a lot of really good information today, just letting people know that overdose death is preventable. There's some things you can do. Like we said, you can go and get your naloxone kit from the pharmacy for free. You can watch out for those signs and symptoms if you're using, or if you know somebody that's using. Check in on your loved ones who you know use, especially on the weekends.